Welcome to Security Watch. This is Zain Khan. Today's topic is spreading awareness of the human rights violations in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Today's special guest is British MP Afzal Khan. He is the shadow deputy opposition leader in the House of Commons. Our second guest, as always, is a senior geopolitical analyst and also DG Pakistan House, Mr. Athar Javed. Welcome to our show, Mr. Khan. This is Zain Khan. It is a pleasure having you on Security Watch.
Pleasure to be here, joining you.
Welcome to our show, as always, Mr. Athar Javed. It's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much, Zain.
Mr. Khan, let's get to the first question, and it's a very important question. What's the current official British position on the Kashmir issue?
Well, it's complex, isn't it? Nothing is simple. But at the heart of it, I would say that the British government acknowledges the difficulty that exists, but when you press them, then the position basically becomes that it's a bilateral matter between India and Pakistan, and they would encourage the both countries to resolve this. So this is the sort of standard position you will get whenever you ask a probing question about Kashmir. Personally, I'm not satisfied with this position. I think because at the heart of this argument is flawed. It's not simply an issue between India and Pakistan. And the core people involved in this dispute are the Kashmiri people. So anything you talk about a resolution when you don't involve the core people, it just does not make sense. But then on the ground reality, again, you see that this issue is actually not bilateral, because you've seen in Ladakh exactly what has happened between India and China. And then on top of that, you clearly have UN resolutions of Security Council, which sort of answers this issue, in the line how the issue should be resolved. So it's clearly an international dispute. Which needs to be resolved, because bearing in mind these three nuclear powers, China, Pakistan and India, that itself should be sufficient danger signal for the world community of what may happen here. But on the wider issue of peace and prosperity in the South Asia, again, it's an issue which actually needs to be resolved. And then when you get to the heart of it, what is it? It's about human rights. It's about human values. It's about that democratic idea of sovereignty of people to decide their future. And that is the Kashmiri people. So at every layer you look at this issue, it pushes you actually not to be a neutral party as saying that this is simply an issue between India and Pakistan, but actually Britain to be more engaged in order to get a resolution of this.
Mr. Athar Javed, how important is the internationalization of the Kashmir issue?
I think it's very, very important. It's not that the international powers are not reacting, but of course they are not reacting to the standards of the values, universal values of human rights. There have been recognitions from United Nations Human Rights Commission in the reports and other organizations from EU and also Amnesty International Human Rights Watch. But this is not enough, actually. There is a need for international powers to understand that the internationalization of Kashmir issue basically doesn't mean to initiate a war. It means to prevent it. That also means that there should be an encouraging initiative from US, from Britain and all countries to comprehend the risks and dangers of three nuclear power, as my colleague, my MP Afzal Khan was mentioning. This is actually the issue. And the other issue relates to that who will actually side and support Kashmiri people. If we look around, there are not many countries who support it openly. Other countries in privately definitely support the issue. But since it's not a matter of territory, that's what India is perceiving. It's a matter of people. It's a matter of lives of 7-8 million people. And that is at risk. And the other important thing from the point of view of diplomacy is that every war ends at the negotiation table. So the important suggestion and I would say a lead to India is give up its stubbornness, strategic arrogance, return to the table, reverse 370 and 35A, talk to Pakistan, talk to Kashmiri people because they are the third party, and that is the third party. I would actually go further down, which is the fact is they are the first party, and then India and Pakistan are the parties. This is the actual situation. India should not play out of this framework. It has kept doing it for many, many decades. In my observation and my assessment, India may not be able to sustain even this all kind of brutality. Look what happened prior to for Second World War. There were warnings, there were warning after warning about the behavior and the attitude of the Nazi government in Germany. But the Western government that time too did not bother. US, Canada, and other countries, basically, they did not really respond to the grievances, genuine grievances of the Jewish people at that time. So, in my view, we should learn from the history. There is a chance, a wider chance of a wider conflict. This has to be prevented. That's why internationalization of Kashmir issue has grounded in the reasoning, is grounded in the reasoning to promote peace and stability and give the right to self-determination to Kashmiri people.
Mr. Khan, as the shadow deputy opposition leader in the House of Commons, what's your strategy to convince the Conservatives in the government on supporting the Kashmir cause?
Well, I think we have a very strong APPG on Kashmir, which is a cross-party. And this is the vehicle, I think, which we can use effectively because it does have a Conservative member of Parliament part of this as well. So they could use their back channel to the Conservative Party to basically press them forward. And I think the key point is we need to pull them off the fence. The British government really needs to understand that strategically in the long term, for the long-term stability of their interest actually lies in being active and not being passive on this dispute. Because at the heart of it, they have a moral responsibility historically with this dispute. And secondly, I think it's to be fair to say the fact that they are a permanent members of the Security Council, they have again a duty to strive for maintaining peace in the world. And then if you take it further with the Commonwealth, again, they will find that both India and Pakistan are important countries in Commonwealth. So their long-term strategy is, or it should be, that they basically strengthen this Commonwealth relationships. And that cannot happen when you have two big countries like Pakistan and India loggerhead against one another. So that also requires it. And I think they should also use their good officers in the European Union, whilst we have left Brexit with the Brexit. But still, I think we have a close and strong established relationship in the European Union. The European Union also has a permanent member of France in there as well. And Germany is equally very powerful. So these countries can actually play a big role. And we know historically from all the multilateral organizations that exist, perhaps the best is the European Union, who are willing to exercise their rights and use their economic muscle also for the human rights issue. They do not separate that. And they have time and time again stood against any human rights violation that takes place. And it includes, of course, against India as well. So I think there are things that Britain can actually do. Our strategy is really to strengthen this APPG Kashmir in British Parliament, and through which we can then have this influence on the two major parties. Within the Labour Party, again, recently a new organization has been set up, because one of the experience we've had is they broadly are very supportive. We saw this the violation which took place back in the August, how the then leader came very clearly against human rights and pushed for the plebiscite to be implemented in line with the UN resolutions. But then there was some disagreement or some misunderstanding, I would say more appropriately, where we are with it. And one of the things was, after, despite having a unanimous resolution passed through the party conference, this was not in the party manifesto. So how do we make sure that in the future we do progress? And here we have got this strong Kashmiri group coming up through in the Labour Party. We've also set up a Muslim Labour network, for which I am the chairperson for. Again, our aim is to look at some of these difficult issues, including Palestine, and see how we can make sure that the Labour Party.
Mr. Athar Javed, let's get to a very technical question. How should we spread awareness of the Kashmir cause in Pakistan and also around the globe?
I think it's extremely important. The only suggestion I would make is that we should now engage the second and third generation out of it. It should be spread to our schools, through schools, and awareness campaigns should run. And then the young university students, both from the Pakistani British origin and the Kashmiri origin, should be involved at the forefront, because in all conflicts, one has to sustain the narrative and create a proper image what's happening inside. It is important that the voices from within Indian occupied Kashmir should come out. There must be more publication and more reports should come out from there, and they should be propagated properly or disseminated. The state of affairs within, inside, I would say, inside the Indian occupied Kashmir. The issue here is also that since there is a lack of understanding that the second generation are the one who would lead this propaganda, countering propaganda warfare of India in this issue. This has to be understood at the highest level and at all levels, whether it's the British Parliament, the groups from APPG, the Kashmiri diaspora, the Pakistani diaspora, because one way or the other you have to hand over this. I mean, I'm not saying that the people like the veterans like Afzal Khan, Lord Qurban, and Lord Nazir, and all other our friends in the British Parliament, myself, and I have a lot of other colleagues, that we should give up. We cannot, and we must not. But we should bring more youth into this perspective to sustain the pressure of the modern communication system. The modern communication system, when I'm saying, I meant is about social media, digitalization of the opinions. And that also matters, because in the end, it's the impact which this digital campaign would bring. But same time, people have objection, of course. We should also mention that there must be more physical efforts from countries involved in the conflict. It means that the Pakistan should do extra efforts. They are doing great job, the Foreign Office and all that. But there is a need still to push things forward, appointing envoys, neutral people, those who understand the global perspectives, but who know and well-read in the international politics. Because if you send anybody who is a Kashmiri, it will not serve the purpose. Yes, there must be a preconditions on having a great qualification to understand the global mood about Kashmir and India. That needs to be done. This will help a lot.
Mr. Khan, how important is the youth in spreading awareness of the Kashmir cause?
Well, if one way of simply putting it, look, our youth are our future. And if we do not invest in our future, then our future is not going to be bright. So I think in that sense, we simply cannot ignore. I think it would be fair to say that in the historical context, maybe there has been negligence where not enough has been done to make sure that the coming generations are intertwined into this struggle. But I think there are positive ways of looking at it. We are where we are. Looking ahead, I think the social media is a very powerful tool, which in a way blunts the traditional media these days. And some of our young people are actually at the forefront of this, and they can play a vital and a critical role in this struggle. Equally, I think when you look at the past, one of the things I had observed was some of our young people, they were more in tune with the Palestinian struggle than with the Kashmiri struggle. But I think where we are in this junction now with the struggle, there is clear links now being developed between what is happening with the Palestinians and what is happening with the Kashmiris in occupied Kashmir. So it opens up a new avenue for us of cooperation between the two struggles, so that from experience of one another, we can sort of learn and move forward. And I think this is pretty critical now, because what you're seeing in the last year or so, that probably slightly longer than a year, the moving away from a non-aligned movement from which it was following the American interest, aligning the strategic game with America, with China, but then also, I think with Israel, there is plenty of evidence around which shows that increased cooperation between Israel and India. There is evidence there of military cooperation and training as well. And we know well the whole history of Palestinian struggle, how the various Israeli governments have been systematically eating in to the land of Palestine, and how they've been changing the demographic. And both these points are being now deployed by India. So both these points are now being deployed by India. So in that sense, I think it's equally more important that there is a better cooperation now within the Kashmiri struggle and the Palestinians. So I do hope that the leadership within the Kashmiris understands this and actually makes sure that they open up the struggle so that it genuinely becomes a movement, so that it takes into account not only the male folks, but also women folks, but also our young people. But it's only by combining the energies and the resources of the three elements that it truly can be a movement, and it can actually drive this struggle forward to its natural conclusion, which has to happen. It's only a matter of time. That it actually has to get there. And India, I think, will do well, I would say, Indian government, current government, to understand from history that it is not through oppression that you can win the hearts. And it's never happened. And there are many examples. And probably the one that India is looking up to is America. Look at it, their example in Vietnam is there. Their might comparatively was huge. Look at it in Afghanistan, but it failed. So no need for India to go through a failed policies after paying a huge price and then concluding that actually it's failed. There's enough evidence that this will not work.
Mr. Athar Javed, let's get to the last question of our first segment. Should Pakistan engage India through economic and trade approaches for the better handling of the Kashmir cause and the Kashmir issue?
No, I don't think so. We can handle through economic trade, but trade and economic and trade is one of the important communication tool. But as I would say that prior to this one, there must be an understanding of India about this grave situation in Indian occupied Kashmir after 5th of August 2019. That has to be resolved. India should return to the negotiation table, start talking. Once they start talking, then the ways and means would develop automatically. This is a very natural phenomena and understanding of both countries for the past 73 years, that they must return to the table and discuss. Pakistan has asked India many times. Pakistan is ready to talk to India about any issue, trade, economy, border issues, Sarkari, Siachen, including the core issue of Jammu and Kashmir. That is a stated position, and I think Pakistan is ready to talk to India, but India has to be ready to talk to Pakistan.
Thank you so much, MP Afzal Khan, for being on Security Watch. It was a pleasure having you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Athar Javed. It's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much, Zain.
This was British MP Afzal Khan. He's also the shadow deputy opposition leader in the House of Commons. And our second guest, as always, was Mr. Athar Javed, a senior geopolitical analyst. We were discussing how to spread awareness of the Kashmir issue internationally. Before we get to our second and last segment, let's take a short break. Take a break. Welcome back from the break. This is our second and last segment, and our second guest is Helene Sejlert. She is a writer and also a prominent activist when it comes to the Kashmir cause. Our second guest, as always, joined us earlier, is Mr. Athar Javed, a senior geopolitical analyst and also DG Pakistan House. Welcome to our show, Helen. This is Zain Khan. It is a pleasure having you on Security Watch.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Welcome to our second segment, Mr. Athar Javed. It's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much, Zain.
Helen, I want to get to the first question. You speak a lot about human rights violations by Indian forces in occupied Kashmir. Can you tell us a little more about these crimes? And also, do you think they're still happening since it's rather silent in Kashmir these days?
Yes. Let's be clear then and spell it out that India has been committing war crimes in Kashmir, in occupied Kashmir, for more than 7 decades. And the crimes, the list is extremely long. There has been, from the start in 1947, there has been massacres with, at that time, over 200,000 people killed, and many more 100,000s forced to flee. After that, we have seen now the last 3 decades a real violent time when India has clamped down on all rights of Kashmiris, and there are torture in a way that we can't even grasp. Last year, a torture report was released, and that report is bone-chilling. It's hard to even read the crimes committed against Kashmiris. Enforced disappearances and also rapes and things like that. But what we shall be focused on now is that what is happening in Kashmir after August 5th last year is another form of crime, because it's an enforced silence. So India is still committing crimes and punishing Kashmiris collectively, but they are doing it more like locking a whole population down and not allowing them to speak. Because every single step you take as a Kashmiri is watched. They are checking you, of course, on the ground, but they are also checking you online. So Kashmiris have been arrested and tortured, actually, for Facebook posts and Twitter posts. And this is not one time, they are doing it constantly. And people are living in a real fear, and this is like a collective punishment of the whole population. So yes, the human rights violations continue, but they have taken another deeper shape, if you want.
Mr. Athar Javed, what are other human rights violations by Indian occupying forces over Kashmir besides the draconian online censorship that Helen just mentioned?
Listen, I think Helen really explained it in a way in which it combines that India is currently driven by international and global methods. Global outlets are being used by their Indian pro-Indian entities sitting at the top, and they are doing is what, like if a Kashmiri is expressing that we are being locked down or the medicine is not in the hospitals, and if certain areas or most of the areas are under digital curfew, It has actually created multiple types of terrorism. I call it also digital terrorism because I think it is because it's not only limiting your understanding of freedom of expression, we call it, and to my surprise, that the Twitter and Facebook, which are fundamentally owned by the Western countries, and human rights values here are really remarkably respected. But I'm not sure what has happened in this case. In this case, the top brass sitting with the Indian origins sitting on different, in Google, in Facebook and Twitter, high positions, they have made like more collaborated with the Indian authorities, especially the law enforcement agencies, that they will ensure that no word gets out. This is the first, I think, grave human rights violation, that you cannot allow your population living under your control to even say thing, communicate with each other. Like example is that if people are ill, they cannot get to hospitals. There has to be some sort of permission. And in the past year, whole year, we heard that people have buried their dead in their courtyards and in your backyards. And then we also know that several hundred, maybe, they are already died. The old people, people with the disease, they didn't provide them life-saving drugs. And the other important point, which we know now from the ground when people somehow one or two voices get out of it, is that they carry out night raids to disappear youngsters and kidnap young girls, rape them or keep them hostage to exploit the families, ask somehow the position that of the protesters. And protesters are who? They don't allow them to get out. If they get out in few hundred, they clamp down again and misplace them. I think three categories of, I would say, contemporary world should look into it, because if the Western values or the universal human values, if they are now compromised because of the Indian market, this will set the standard also for other countries. One category relates to the right to communicate to outside world and to each other. The other category is relating to the basic necessities. They require medicine, food, and all that. If it is given by through curfew or given by the permission of the administration, that is, we call it that imprisoning the population. It's not really that they're living in peace or a regular life. Look, we are living here in these countries, or in Islamabad or in other Western countries, you are free to do whatever you like. The minimum standards are not met. And the third and the last one is this, we call them fake encounters and night raids in which they disappear young boys. 5 to 10,000 people or 5 to 8,000 young boys were really disappeared during this past year. More than 200 young Kashmiris, including women and children, are killed actually. The destruction of property is a new method they're using. That if they find out one guy or girl is protesting, they will come and destroy their home. What will happen to the others? Just think about it. So the contemporary human rights violation in Indian occupied Kashmir conducted by Indian military at the behest of BJP government demonstrates a new kind of, as we have been calling it, Nazis, Gestapo style imprisonment of the population and treatment.
Helen, let's get to you. Journalists have had a tough time many years in occupied Kashmir, but lately many have been arrested, questioned, tortured. Is this the reason that we no longer get so much fresh information out of Kashmir?
Yes, definitely. I just want to agree with you here about the censorship, because it's deep and it's been going on for years. And it's important to note that normal Kashmiris, not journalists, totally normal people, just posting normal things, are targeted on Facebook, on Twitter, etc., just for saying the truth. And when it comes to journalism, it's like walking on a tightrope, because it's really, really hard to express views that are not tiptoeing the Delhi narrative. And just like you said, the Delhi narrative is very, very strong, and they are controlling both Kashmiris and also the rest of the world, since they are also taking off accounts. They have suspended my account on Facebook. I had 10 years of, I posted long, what's it called? I can't find the word. Long posts. I'm a scholar, and yet they took my account off. And they are doing this to Kashmiris every single day. But when it comes to journalists, they have been harassed for years, and also international journalists have been banned from entering and reporting from Kashmir. And big news outlets like Al Jazeera lost their security clearance a couple of years ago when they reported about the UN report that was also speaking about the lack of press freedom in India. So this has been going on. What they also now do to journalists is that they check every post they make on social media, and many journalists have been targeted, they have been trashed, they have been detained. There is, for example, Asif Sultan, who has been sitting 2 years in jail. He wrote a long article about Burhan Wani, and he's been sitting there without a real trial or any specific reasons, because they consider him a security threat. But they are actually considering everyone a security threat. Phones, laptops, cameras have been confiscated, and many have been severely threatened. If they threaten your family, what shall you do? You stop reporting the reality. So this is a real grave problem, and just like you said, the world should take notice.
Helen, you've just mentioned Al Jazeera and the treatment of journalists in occupied Kashmir. Why isn't the international community taking notice?
That's a very good question that I have asked myself a million times. And I think what I just told you gives a little bit of answer, because it is not easy for Kashmiris to report the reality today. But if you are a journalist, your job is to investigate things and not to copy paste the news coming from India. You are supposed to dig a little bit deeper. You are supposed to check out what is really happening. And I think that that's where our part comes in, that we need to help the Kashmiris, because they are being suppressed. I mean, their voices are choked. They can't speak and tell about the reality on the ground. So we need to tell their stories. And this is really important as well, that we listen to the stories, because they are the voices we should hear. We need to, India is dehumanizing the Kashmiris, but we need to humanize them again. We need to lift their faces. We need to show their stories and hear them out and pass it on and tell media that this is not true what you're telling. This is what India is saying, but those people killed in Kashmir are civilian Kashmiris, for example. We need to amplify the Kashmiri voices.
Helen, I'd also like you to mention how Kashmiri activists and Indian journalists are not allowed to contact you on Twitter and give you any information, and how you're blacklisted by the Indian occupying forces.
Yeah, this is like, what I received is nothing if you compare it to what Kashmiris are facing on the ground. I don't have a gun pointed at my face and things like that. But we should be aware of that speaking about Indian atrocities is not risk-free, because you get attacked for it. And like I said, my Facebook account was suspended. Twitter has, India has asked Twitter to withhold my account in India, which means that Kashmiris can't see me neither. And that is, of course, to stop the communication and for me not to be able to speak and have a knowledge of what is happening on the ground. And on top, they have restricted my account, since I have many, many followers, also international journalists and writers and so this is something India is doing frequently to everyone who is speaking about Kashmir. And this is what we need to be aware of and lift and tell about, and also tell our authorities, because, I mean, Sweden shouldn't allow that a citizen of Sweden is being treated like that, because it is not correct. I am speaking about human rights violations, and I am punished for it. I have also had many Indian accounts after me who have issued death threats, rape threats. They have found my address, etc. And they have threatened me in different ways. This is how they do, because they don't have arguments. They can't argue for their thing. We are on the side, the right side. We have justice on our side. The Kashmiri people have a right to self-determination. They have a right to their referendum and to decide their future. We are not doing something wrong. So we need to, despite that it's hard sometimes, realize that Kashmiris have it even harder. And we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with them and show them that we don't give up until they have their Azadi freedom.
Mr. Athar Javed, we've spoken about press freedoms in occupied Kashmir. Tell us a little about how activists and politicians have been abducted recently in occupied Kashmir. Lastly, also tell us the solution to this issue.
Yes, thank you. I think let's start with Sayyid Ali Gilani, who is a very old man, but a formidable resistance leader, a peaceful leader, and globally he's been respected. He's just awarded Nishan-e-Pakistan award by Pakistani government on its peaceful struggle against Indian occupation. Then we have Mir Wais Farooq, and then Wais Umar Farooq. Then we have Musarrat Alam Bhatt is also under house arrest, and Yasin Malik has been tortured. And there are other leaders, Shabir Shah, and many other leaders actually. The young leaders, they have, of course, martyred Burhan Wani, and subsequent young leadership, the second tier, third tier leadership. So basically it falls in, as Helen was saying, in dehumanization and also in ethnic cleansing. So these leadership, basically, they are inside, but India must understand that the popular leadership always thrive on these kind of actions. Look, for example, Nelson Mandela, when he was imprisoned against this apartheid in South Africa, the South African people basically didn't stop thinking about it. The world followed that thing. But in the case of, I think, India, there is a big problem, a misunderstanding of the West, that as if Indian market only will serve their purpose. We are hearing that Indian market economy is crashing because of the COVID-19, and there are significant number of international companies are withdrawing. We shall see in near future and farther future how it will affect the opinion making. So I think the solution, if we can say as an academic or political science student, what is the solution? The first solution is to release the entire population of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, reverse 370 and 35A, at least follow the basic human rights, allow them to express, go to their job, their economy is in tatters, their children haven't been to school, they're old and young alike, ill, cannot go to hospitals. These are the basic things. And look, the countries who are not supporting, as I said before, and as my worthy colleague said, Helen, that if they're not supporting the basic human rights standards, a time will come that they will understand that this can become a nuclear flashpoint, a war between India and Pakistan. In order to prevent that, the phases are very clear, that there should be immediately cessation of this curfew and start talking, that India should come back to the table, talk to Pakistan, include Kashmiri leadership, release them, follow the UN resolution. We are not asking really that Kashmir should be part of Pakistan. We are not asking that. We are only asking to implement the right to self-determination, which is given by the UNSC and which was asked by India. India went to the United Nations. So I think these are the facts that it has to be phased and quantified accordingly. If India considers that they will somehow do everything put under the carpet and world will be silent, I do not think so, because Pakistan, for one, and many other countries alike, they are going to go after India and its atrocities, and we will keep talking as we can, as much as we can, to highlight the plight of Kashmiri people. The solution is a twofold. One is India come back to table and negotiate, talk, including Kashmiris as the party to the dispute. And second, stop this migrating non-Kashmiri people into Indian occupied Kashmir in order to try to change the demographic factor. This has to be stopped because this is a fake procedure they have adopted. It will not work. The world is not sleeping that much as it appears to. Kashmiris would never give up. That's my last word.
Helen, any last words before we wrap up the show?
Yes, I want to conclude and say that I completely agree that we need to give some fresh air to the Kashmiri people and try to help them to get to breathe again. And it's important here to also know that Pakistan has been offering India many times to come to the negotiation table. And this is something the world needs to pay attention to, that India is obstructing peace. We need to also put pressure on India so they open up, because human rights, we can talk to eternity about it and we can sign all the fancy declarations, but if we don't live up to it and make sure that people are not living under the conditions Kashmiris are living under and being watched every single step they take. If we can't make sure that this is not happening, we can as well throw the declarations away. So yes, put pressure on India to come to the negotiation table with Kashmir and Pakistan. That would be the best thing.
Thank you so much, Helene Sejlert, for being on Security Watch. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Athar Javed. It's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much, Zain. It's a pleasure having with Helen as well. I'm really very much impressed by her views and analysis.
This was Helene Sejlert, a writer and also a prominent activist when it comes to the Kashmir cause. And our second guest, as always, was Mr. Athar Javed. We were discussing how Kashmiris face online and also press censorship. Until the next episode of Security Watch, this is Zain Khan. Keep on watching Security Watch. Take care and goodbye.